Hello, everyone. My name is Evelyn Parker, and this is the story of how my own daughter's hand striking my face was the catalyst for the greatest decision of my life. She wanted my house, the home I built from nothing, to fuel her reckless life. Instead, I gave it all away to the orphans who reminded me of who I once was. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. Your support means the world to this old Texas heart. So please consider liking and subscribing, and let's get into the story. The air in my kitchen hung thick and sweet with the scent of peach cobbler, a peace offering I'd baked in the desperate hope of bridging the chasm that had opened between my daughter and me. For 32 years, that kitchen had been our sanctuary. It was where I'd kissed Melissa's scraped knees, where we'd celebrated every birthday with a lopsided homemade cake, and where I'd held her tight the night her father, my dear John, passed away. The worn oak table, its surface a roadmap of our shared history etched in scratches and water rings, was meant to be our common ground. But the woman who stood across from me that Tuesday afternoon was a stranger, her eyes as hard and cold as polished river stones. "It's not a request, Mom," Melissa said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She tossed a sheaf of crumpled, threatening letters onto the table. They scattered across the polished wood. Credit card statements, final notices, each one a testament to a life lived far beyond her means. "I'm drowning. I lost the marketing job 3 months ago. This is the only way out." I picked up one of the letters, the red ink screaming past due. My heart ached. I'd given her everything I could. A college education I never had, a down payment for a car, endless support for a string of failed business ventures. I had loved her not just with my heart, but with my hands, my time, my savings. "Honey, we can figure this out," I pleaded, my voice trembling slightly. "We can make a budget. I can help you look for a new job. But the house? This is all I have left of your father. It's my home. It's a prison." She spat back, her perfectly manicured hand sweeping across the room. "It's old. It's filled with junk. But it's worth a lot. Enough to get a loan, to pay this off, to start over. All I need is for you to sign it over to me, or at least give me the keys and the deed so I can use it as collateral." The audacity of it stole my breath. This house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of a promise John and I had made to each other, to build a life of stability, a fortress against the chaos of the world. It was the one thing I owned outright, the one piece of solid ground beneath my feet. "No, Melissa," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I will not. This house is not a solution to your spending habits." Her face, once so open and full of light, contorted into a mask of pure fury. "You selfish old woman. You'd rather sit here and rot with your precious memories than help your own daughter?" She took a step closer, her body radiating a tension that made the air crackle. "I am your only family. You owe me this." "I owe you nothing but the love I've already given," I whispered, tears finally welling in my eyes. "And you have squandered it." That's when it happened. Her hand flew through the air, a blur of motion before it connected with my cheek. The sound was a flat, ugly crack in the quiet kitchen. The force of it snapped my head to the side, my glasses flying off and skittering across the linoleum floor. A sharp, stinging heat bloomed on my skin, but it was nothing compared to the ice that flooded my veins. My own child, my daughter, had struck me. For a long moment, there was only the sound of our ragged breathing. The sweet smell of peaches now seemed cloying, rotten. She stood there, her hand still raised slightly, her chest heaving. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a wild, desperate rage. She was waiting for me to break, to cry, to crumble and give her what she wanted. But something else happened inside me. The part of me that was a mother, the part that would have forgiven anything, died in that instant. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The little girl I had raised was gone. In her place stood a predator who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle. "Get out," I said, my voice a low, chilling monotone. I didn't recognize it as my own. She scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "This isn't over. I'll be back for those keys. One way or another." She snatched her purse from the counter and stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that a small framed photo of her as a child fell from the wall and the glass shattered. I didn't move. I just stood there, my hand pressed to my throbbing cheek, listening to the roar of her car as it peeled away from the curb. The silence she left behind was profound, a vacuum where 32 years of love and memory had once been. I looked around the kitchen, at the worn cabinets, the fading floral wallpaper John had insisted on, the little pencil marks on the doorframe where we'd tracked Melissa's height. It wasn't a prison. It was a legacy. But it was a legacy for a daughter who no longer existed. Slowly, I bent down and picked up my glasses. Then I walked over to the shattered picture frame. I carefully removed the photo of a 5-year-old Melissa, smiling a gap-toothed grin on her first day of school. I looked at that innocent face, and for the first time, I felt nothing. The emotional cord had been severed by the slap. I walked to my roll-top desk in the living room, the one that held all our important papers. My hands were steady as I pulled out the deed to the house. I looked at my name, Evelyn Parker, printed in clear, black ink. My home, my asset, my choice. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A cold dormitory room, the scratchy wool blanket, the faint, persistent smell of antiseptic, cynic Jude's home for children, the place that had taken me in when I had nothing and no one. I remembered the faces of the other children, all of us adrift in the world, dreaming of a place that felt safe, a place like this. And in that moment of absolute heartbreak, a new purpose began to bloom. If my own blood would not honor this home, I would give it to the children who were just like I had been. Melissa wanted the house to start her life over. Fine. I would use it to start the lives of 100 others. I picked up the phone, my fingers dialing a number I hadn't called in years. The number for a real estate agent I trusted. The sting on my cheek had faded, replaced by the fire of a new, unshakable resolve. The silence in the days that followed was a physical presence. It filled the empty spaces at the dinner table, echoed in the upstairs hallway, and settled over Melissa's untouched bedroom like a layer of dust. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, felt like a prelude to her return. And I found myself holding my breath, my nerves stretched taut. The house, my fortress for decades, now felt like a cage where I was trapped with the ghost of my daughter. The red mark on my cheek had faded to a pale yellow-green bruise, but the internal wound remained raw and gaping. I spent my time methodically, purposefully, detaching myself from the life I had built within these walls. It was a painful but necessary ritual. I sorted through boxes of old photographs, my heart clenching at the images of a smiling, innocent Melissa. There she was, riding her first bike, its streamers flying. There she was, a sullen teenager in a prom dress, pretending to be annoyed while I took her picture. It was like looking at a different person, someone I had known and loved a lifetime ago. I packed them all away, not with anger, but with a profound, aching sadness. This was a funeral for a relationship, and I was its sole mourner. My resolve however, did not waver. It was anchored in the memories of a much colder, lonelier childhood. During the long, quiet evenings, I'd sit in John's old armchair and let my mind drift back to St. Jude's. I remembered Sister Agnes, a stern woman with kind eyes, who taught me how to read by the light of a single, bare bulb. I remembered the gnawing hunger in my belly that was a constant companion, and the fierce, protective bond I formed with the other orphans. We were a ragtag family, bound by our shared abandonment. We promised each other that one day we would have homes with full pantries and doors that locked against the world's cruelties. That promise, I realized, was the one I needed to honor now. My promise to Melissa, the one I had made when I first held her in my arms, had been broken by her. But the promise I had made to that little girl in the scratchy wool blanket, the little girl who was me, that one I could still keep. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Carol, arrived on Thursday. She walked through the house with a gentle, respectful air, admiring the hardwood floors John and I had installed ourselves and the rose bushes I'd babied for 20 years. When we sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had been struck, she laid out the paperwork. "Evelyn, this house will sell fast," she said, her voice soft. "The market is strong. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" Her eyes were searching, looking for any sign of doubt. I took a deep breath, the air still faintly smelling of peaches and betrayal. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was worn smooth with age, its details softened by the touch of my fingers over half a century. "A boy named Thomas gave this to me at St. Jude's," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He carved it with a stolen penknife. He said it was a sparrow, and sparrows can always find their way home. He died of pneumonia that winter." I placed the bird on the table between us. This house was supposed to be my final home, but my daughter doesn't want it for its warmth or its memories. She wants it for its cash value. So I'm going to give it to children who need a home more than she does. I want every penny from this sale, after your commission, to go directly to St. Jude's. I've already spoken to my lawyer. He's drawing up the donation trust. Carol looked from the bird to my face, and her professional demeanor melted away. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Evelyn," she said, her voice filled with a respect that warmed me to my core. "It would be my honor to sell this house for you." The moment the for sale sign was hammered into my front lawn, a sense of liberation washed over me. The clean, bold lines of the sign were a declaration of independence. It was no longer just a house. It was a future for children I would never meet. It was a legacy. I had turned my pain into a promise. That evening, my phone rang. I saw Melissa's name flash on the screen and my stomach twisted into a knot. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text message buzzed. "You will regret this." Another one followed. "That is my house. That is my inheritance." And another, "Take that sign down now." I read the messages, and instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of pity for her. She was so blinded by greed, she couldn't see what she had truly lost. It wasn't a house. It was a mother. I blocked her number, the action small but definitive. I went to bed that night and, for the first time in a week, I didn't dream of a slap. I dreamed of a flock of small wooden sparrows, taking flight from my rooftop and soaring into a clear, blue sky. I was finally finding my way home, not to a place made of wood and nails, but to a place of purpose within myself. The house was quiet, but it was no longer a lonely quiet. It was the calm, expectant quiet of a new beginning. The for sale sign on my lawn wasn't just a piece of metal and wood, It was a battle line drawn in the dirt. I knew Melissa wouldn't take this lying down, but I was unprepared for the form her retaliation would take. It began not with a bang, but with a creeping, insidious dread that seeped into the cracks of my newfound peace. It started with the car, a low, black, muscle car with tinted windows that seemed to drink the sunlight. It would park across the street for hours at a time, its engine a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of my house. I never saw the driver clearly, just the silhouette of a man with broad shoulders, sometimes with Melissa in the passenger seat, her face a pale, furious blur. Then came the nights. Phone calls at 2 a.m., where the only sound on the other end was static-filled breathing. I'd hang up, my heart hammering against my ribs, only for it to ring again minutes later. I started unplugging the phone from the wall before I went to bed, but the silence felt just as threatening. My home, once a sanctuary, was becoming a place of siege. Carol began to hold open houses on the weekends. I'd leave for a few hours, sitting in a nearby park, clutching the small wooden sparrow in my pocket until my knuckles were white. When I returned after the first open house, I found that someone had walked through my rose bushes, snapping the heads off my prized yellow blooms, the ones John had planted for our 10th anniversary. The petals were scattered across the lawn like drops of blood. There was no proof, of course, but I knew. It was a message. The man in the car soon grew bolder. I learned his name was Rick. Melissa had mentioned him once, dismissively, as a guy I know. He was a hulking figure, with tattoos snaking up his neck and a permanent sneer etched on his face. One afternoon, as I was bringing in my groceries, he got out of the car and walked slowly towards my driveway. He didn't speak. He just stood there, at the edge of my property, cracking his knuckles and watching me with eyes that were devoid of any light or warmth. He was a guard dog, and Melissa held the leash. The psychological warfare was relentless. My trash cans would be overturned, their contents strewn across the yard. A dead squirrel was left on my welcome mat. Small, unsettling things designed to fray my nerves, to make me feel unsafe in the only place I was supposed to be secure. I installed a new deadbolt and a chain lock, actions that felt both necessary and futile. I was a prisoner in my own home, and the walls felt like they were closing in. Carol called me one evening, her voice strained. "Evelyn, we had a very promising couple today. They love the house. But," they said as they were leaving, a man approached them in the driveway. He told them the house had foundation issues and a terrible termite problem. Said the whole neighborhood was going downhill. "It was Rick," I said, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "I figured," Carol sighed. "This is harassment. Evelyn, we need to go to the police." We did. I sat in the sterile, impersonal police station and recounted the events to a weary-looking officer. He took notes, his expression a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. "Ma'am," he said, his pen clicking. "Without a direct threat, without proof they're the ones doing it. This is a gray area. It's her word against yours. I can send a patrol car to drive by more frequently, but my hands are tied until they cross a more definitive line." That line was crossed a week later. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I saw them pull up, not across the street, but directly in my driveway, blocking my car. Melissa got out of the passenger side, her face set like stone. Rick emerged from the driver's side, moving with a predator's lazy confidence. My blood ran cold. I locked the door just as they reached the porch. Melissa began to pound on it with her fist. "Mom, we need to talk. Open this door." Her voice was laced with a false sweetness that was more terrifying than her anger. "Go away, Melissa!" I yelled back, my voice shaking. "You are not welcome here. Don't make me have Rick take this door off its hinges," she called out. "We saw the pending offer sign on the lawn. You are not selling my house." Rick let out a low chuckle, a gravelly sound that seemed to scrape against my spine. Then, he slammed his shoulder into the door. The frame shuddered, the wood groaning in protest. He did it again, harder this time. A crack appeared near the lock. Panic seized me. This was no longer about intimidation. They were coming in. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the kitchen, looking for a weapon, for an escape. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast-iron skillet from the stove. It felt absurdly heavy, ridiculously inadequate. Another slam, and the wood around the deadbolt splintered. Melissa was screaming now, a torrent of abuse and entitlement. "You did this to yourself. You forced our hand. All you had to do was give me what was mine." I retreated further into the house, my back hitting the wall of the hallway. The skillet was slick with sweat in my trembling hands. I could hear Rick breathing on the other side of the door, a series of low, animalistic grunts as he gathered himself for another charge. The sound of splintering wood was the sound of my life unraveling, the sound of my safe world being torn apart by the two people who were supposed to protect it. My own child and the monster she had brought to my door. The next impact, I knew, would be the last. The door would give way, and they would be inside. The world dissolved into a cacophony of splintering wood and enraged shouting. The door frame finally gave way with a deafening crack, and the door flew inward, slamming against the wall. Rick stumbled into the entryway, a triumphant, ugly grin on his face. Behind him, Melissa's expression was a twisted mask of rage and entitlement. For a moment, we were all frozen in a tableau of domestic horror. The cast-iron skillet in my hands suddenly felt as heavy and useless as a child's toy. "See?" Melissa said, her voice dripping with venom as she stepped over the threshold. "We told you we'd be back. Now, where is the deed? And the keys?" Rick's eyes scanned the living room, taking in the modest furniture, the family photos, the life I had so carefully built. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on the skillet, and let out a short, derisive laugh. "You gonna cook us breakfast, old lady?" My voice was a strangled whisper. "Get out of my house." "This isn't your house anymore," Melissa snapped, advancing on me. "You forfeited your right to it when you tried to sell my inheritance." She lunged for the skillet. My reaction was pure instinct. I swung it. Not with any real force, but enough to make her recoil. It was a mistake. It was the provocation Rick had been waiting for. He moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He grabbed my wrist, and with a simple, brutal twist, he wrenched the skillet from my hand. It clattered to the floor. The pain that shot up my arm was electric, and I cried out. "That's enough!" He growled, shoving me backward. I stumbled, my feet tangling, and fell hard against the hallway table. The lamp on it wobbled and crashed to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain seemed to break Melissa's last restraint. "Find the papers!" she shrieked at Rick. "I'll handle her." What happened next is a blur of pain and terror. Melissa grabbed me by the arms of my cardigan, her fingers digging into my skin like talons. She shook me, my head snapping back and forth. "Where are they? Where did you hide the deed?" Her spittle flew into my face as she screamed. I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on her breath. While she was screaming, Rick was tearing my living room apart. He ripped cushions from the sofa, swept books and pictures from the shelves, overturned my sewing basket, sending spools of thread and needles scattering across the carpet. It was a violation of the deepest kind, watching this stranger desecrate my home with such casual malice. "I don't have them," I choked out, trying to push Melissa away. "They're with my lawyer. The sale is final." The lie was a desperate gamble, but it was all I had. It only fueled her fury. She shoved me again. Harder this time. I lost my footing completely, and my head hit the corner of the wall with a sickening thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and I slid down to the floor, dazed. Through a swimming haze, I saw Rick storm into the kitchen. I heard cabinets being wrenched open, the clatter of pots and pans being thrown to the floor. Melissa stood over me, her face contorted. "You're lying. You've always been a liar." She drew back her foot and kicked me in the ribs. A sharp, searing pain took my breath away. I curled into a ball on the floor, trying to protect myself, a low moan escaping my lips. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my daughter. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. The tinkling, shattering sound of glass from the front of the house. Rick yelled from the kitchen. "What was that?" "It's probably just the wind." Melissa spat, but her voice held a new note of uncertainty. Then we heard it. A man's voice, firm and loud. "Evelyn, are you all right in there? I'm calling 911. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a quiet widower who mostly kept to himself. He must have heard the commotion. He must have seen them break down the door. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. Melissa's face went white. She looked at Rick, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. They were no longer predators. They were criminals about to be caught. "We have to go. Now," Rick hissed. He grabbed Melissa by the arm and dragged her towards the back of the house. I heard the back door slam open and then the sound of them crashing through the fence in the backyard. And then there was silence. A silence broken only by my own ragged, painful breathing and the distant, approaching wail of sirens. I lay there, on the floor of my ruined hallway, amidst the debris of my life. The pain in my side was a fiery agony, and my head throbbed in time with the pulsing lights that began to flash through my windows, painting the walls in strobing blues and reds. The sound of sirens had never been so beautiful. It was the sound of rescue. It was the sound of the end of my terror and the beginning of their judgment. The days that followed the assault were a blur of sterile hospital rooms, gentle-voiced nurses, and the steady, rhythmic beeping of machines. I had 2 cracked ribs and a concussion, bruises that painted my skin in ugly shades of purple and blue. But the physical pain was a dull echo compared to the hollowing out of my soul. The trial, however, brought a sharp, unwelcome clarity. Sitting in that cold, wood-paneled courtroom, I saw Melissa for the first time since she had fled my home. She sat beside Rick, both of them dressed in ill-fitting formal wear, looking sullen and defiant. She refused to meet my eyes. There was no remorse on her face, only the bitter resentment of a cornered animal. My testimony was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. With Carol holding my hand in the front row, I recounted every detail: the threats, the broken door, the feel of my daughter's hands on me, the sickening impact of her foot against my ribs. I spoke of the house, not as a piece of property, but as a home filled with memories she had chosen to shatter. When the prosecutor presented the photos of my injuries and the damage to my home, a quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. The most damning evidence came from Mr. Henderson. On the stand, his voice shaking but resolute, he described seeing Rick and Melissa break down my door and hearing my screams. His 911 call, played for the jury, was chilling. My desperate cries for them to leave were clearly audible in the background. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty: aggravated assault and breaking and entering. As the judge sentenced them to significant prison time, Melissa finally looked at me. Her eyes were not filled with regret, but with a burning, unadulterated hatred. In that moment, I knew I had not lost a daughter that night. I had simply been forced to see the stranger she had been for a very long time. I felt no triumph, only a deep, profound sorrow for the little girl with the gap-toothed grin I once knew. 2 months later, on a bright, sunny Texas morning, I stood on a different kind of stage. The sale of the house had gone through, and a lovely young family was moving in, promising to cherish the rose bushes. Now, in the sun-drenched auditorium of the newly renovated St. Jude's Home for Children, I held a large ceremonial check. The room was filled with the smiling faces of children, the dedicated staff, and local news cameras. My hands trembled as I stepped up to the podium. I looked out at the sea of young faces, some curious, some shy, some hopeful. I saw myself in every single one of them. "My name is Evelyn Parker," I began, my voice stronger than I thought it would be. "A long time ago, I was a little girl sitting right where you are. This place, St. Jude's, was my home. The people here were my family. They taught me that a home isn't just a roof over your head. It's a place where you feel safe. It's a place where you are loved." I paused, my eyes finding the director of the home, a kind woman who had been my staunchest supporter through this whole ordeal. "I recently sold the house I lived in for over 30 years. It was a place I built with my late husband, a place filled with memories. But I learned a hard lesson, that a house is just bricks and mortar if the love inside it dies. So, I decided to turn that house back into a home, not for me, but for all of you." I held up the check, the number written on it large and clear. "With this money, St. Jude's can ensure that every child who walks through its doors has a warm bed, good food, and the chance at a future they deserve. This is not a donation. It's a promise fulfilled. A promise from a former orphan to her brothers and sisters." Tears streamed down the faces of some of the staff. Even a few of the older children looked misty-eyed. As the room erupted in applause, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. The bruises had faded, the house was sold, and the monsters were locked away. As I handed the check to the director, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, quiet and complete. I had given away my past to secure their future, and in doing so, I had finally, truly, found my way home. I would be moving into a comfortable room at a senior living community the next day, not an ending, but a new chapter, surrounded by people, activity, and a quiet, earned peace. My new room is small, but the window looks out over a garden filled with yellow roses. It's peaceful here. The silence isn't the empty, menacing silence of my old house, but a gentle quiet filled with the distant sounds of lives being lived. The ghosts of my past have finally been laid to rest. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about the promises we keep to the children we once were. My legacy isn't a house or a bloodline. It's the laughter that will fill the halls of St. Jude's for years to come. It's the knowledge that I took the greatest pain of my life and transformed it into the greatest gift I could ever give. Justice was served in that courtroom, but my true healing began when I let go of what was and embraced what could be, for them. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your own peace? What does the word home truly mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give me strength.